Harry Macklowe made $900 million building 432 Park Avenue. According to the developers, the projected sellout of the whole building was $3, or $1 billion. CIM made a cool $900 million in profit. Georgia Forestry Commission, $900 million. From a building whose facade is now documented to contain thousands of cracks. A 10-inch deep crack in the building's core. Steel rebar corroding inside reinforced concrete columns, water infiltrating the structure, owners trapped in units they could not easily sell. And buried inside the $165 million lawsuit that the 432 Park Avenue Condo Board filed in April 2025, a lawsuit built on 7 million pages of documents and 100 days of depositions, is the specific allegation that explains how a developer makes $900 million from a building that engineers were warning would fail before the first resident moved in. The board of 432 claim that rather than take action, developers fired every consultant that warned of the problems and hid the defects. From apartment owners with the aim of securing massive profits and leaving the board holding the bag. Georgia Forestry Commission. They fired every consultant who told the truth. Not every consultant. Every consultant who told the truth. The ones who stayed. The ones who wrote the letters, produced the reports, issued the inspections that New York City's Department of Buildings relied upon, are the ones who told a different story. And somewhere in 7 million pages of documents, the two stories exist side by side. Stay with me. Because the cracks are what everyone is covering. The images, the facade, the swarm inspection classification, the groaning in high winds, the elevators that malfunction when the building sways, all of that is real. All of it is documented. All of it is in the lawsuit. But the lawsuit is 46 pages long, and buried in pages 31 through 38, in the section that describes not the physical damage, but the institutional response to discovering it, is an allegation that, if proven, is not a construction defect story at all. It is a conspiracy story, a documented, depositioned 7 million page conspiracy to mislead a city agency, deceive buyers, and protect $900 million in profit from the consequences of a building that was known, before it opened, to be failing. There is a specific letter in this lawsuit, written to the New York City Department of Buildings, that allegedly misrepresented the findings of a survey that had discovered 1,893 defects. 1,893. And the letter that described them to the agency responsible for building safety in New York City did not disclose the full findings. We are going to go through all of it. Stay with me. First, the number. Because 1 out of 893 is not a count of cracks. It is a count of documented defects in the facade of a building that houses some of the wealthiest people in the world. The building's white concrete facade is riddled with cracks, fissures, and even missing chunks of material. Visible damage can be seen along portions of the facade, including deep fissures and areas where pieces have broken off entirely. Engineers say this raises serious questions about the structure's envelope and long-term durability. CBS News. The facade of 432 Park Avenue is a 30-inch thick concrete lattice, each section a 10-foot square aperture and a grid that runs the full height of a 1,396-foot tower. That lattice is not decorative cladding applied over a separate structural system. It is load-bearing. It carries the forces that the building's extreme slenderness ratio, 15:1, among the most extreme ever built in a residential high-rise, generates from wind loading, thermal expansion, and the simple weight of the structure itself. After the tower was completed, the facade experienced excess wind forces that caused the concrete to crack. The developers rejected the idea of using fly ash in the concrete, which would have strengthened the material, but also darkened it. As a result, the final mixture began cracking when it was built. Wildfire Explorer. When it was built, not after 10 years of weather exposure, not as a result of aging, the concrete began cracking during construction, before the first resident moved in, before the first buyer closed on their unit. The developers knew, the engineers knew, the architects knew. Among the suit's allegations are claims that CIM Group ignored concerns raised by various concrete consultants, as well as the project's late architect Raphael Vignoli about the strength of the concrete mix. The condo board claims that mock-up tests showed the material's use would result in cracking, but CIM Group and its contractors bowled forward with complete disregard for the inevitable problems it would cause for the building and its future residents. CNN mock-up tests. Before the tower was built, physical models of the facade were constructed and tested. The tests showed the concrete would crack. The developers proceeded anyway. That is the timeline. Crack confirmed by test. Built anyway. Sold to buyers. 1,893 defects found. Letter to the DOB does not disclose the full findings. $900 million in profit extracted. Here's the specific allegation that makes this a fraud story rather than a construction defect story. The lawsuit alleges that McGraw-Hudson and WSP misled New York City Department of Buildings in a letter that misrepresented the nature, extent, and type of cracking. It claims the letter failed to disclose the full findings of a survey that had discovered 1,893 defects. CNN 1,893 defects found in a survey. A letter sent to the city agency responsible for ensuring building safety in New York. The letter that did not fully disclose what the survey found. The New York City Department of Buildings issues swamp classifications, safe with a repair and maintenance program, based on facade inspection reports it receives. If a report does not fully disclose the findings of the underlying survey, the DOB's classification is based on incomplete information. That matters specifically because the Swarm P classification is what the developers cited when defending the building's condition publicly. A spokesperson for 432 Park told Fox Business that the claims that the facade is deteriorating are contradicted by the board's own engineers who have certified the facade as SWARP, CNBC SWARP. The classification that the lawsuit alleges was obtained through a letter that misrepresented 1,893 defects. The same classification is being used as the defense against the lawsuit alleging it was improperly obtained. In 2022, an inspection found unsafe conditions during a facade inspection at the building. As required by law, the inspector notified the Department of Buildings, filing an unsafe notification with it in October 2022. The department said the owners of the building made subsequent repairs to remediate these unsafe conditions. A new report was filed in February 2023 indicating that the facade of the building was in swamp condition. Wildfire Explorer unsafe in 2022. Repaired. Back to swamp in 2023. Back to swamp in the April 2025 inspection. The cycle, unsafe, repair, swamp, unsafe, is documented. The lawsuit argues the repair to swamp cycles address symptoms while the underlying defect remains. The developers argue the swamp classification means the building is safe. Between those two positions, in Manhattan State Supreme Court are 7 million pages of documents. Here is the detail that should stop you cold. Harry Macklow's proposed solution to the facade cracking was a clear silicone finish. Macklow suggested using a clear silicone finish to repair the 30-inch thick concrete facade, similar to the one used to protect his yacht. His yacht. The material used to protect a private watercraft from saltwater corrosion applied to the facade of the third tallest residential building in the Western Hemisphere. A 396-foot tower of 30-inch thick reinforced concrete, experiencing excess wind forces that have been documented to generate cracking since the building's construction. His yacht sealant, for a building where someone paid $70 million for a penthouse. A suggestion that an opaque elastomeric covering could be applied to the facade to prevent air and water infiltration was ignored because it would significantly alter the building's appearance and make it less appealing to the world's billionaires. CNN. An elastomeric covering, the engineering solution that consultants recommended to address the cracking, was rejected, not because it was structurally inadequate, because it would change how the building looked, because the all-white minimalist aesthetic that made 432 Park Avenue the defining symbol of super-tall luxury was more important than the repair that would prevent water from reaching the steel inside the concrete. The aesthetic was chosen over the fix. The yacht sealant was preferred over the engineering solution, and the consultants who recommended the correct fix were fired. Rather than take action, developers fired every consultant that warned of the problems. Georgia Forestry Commission. Every consultant, not the ones who found too many defects, not the ones who were too expensive, the ones who warned of the problems. Here's the detail that most coverage has noted briefly and none has fully explained. The lawsuit claims that the tower's facade is plagued with thousands of severe cracks, spalling, and other forms of deterioration, including a 10-inch deep crack in the building's core. CNN, the core, not the facade. The core. 432. Park Avenue's structural system consists of two components: an outer shell of concrete columns that carry gravity loads and stiffen the building against wind, and a central reinforced concrete core, 30 feet square with 30-inch thick walls, that houses the elevator shafts, stairwells, and mechanical services. The core is not decorative. It is the structural spine of the building. It is the element that resists the lateral forces, the wind loads on a 1,396-foot tower that the extreme slenderness ratio generates. Without the core performing at its designed capacity, the outer shell cannot be the only load path for a 96-story building in Midtown. Manhattan that experiences wind speeds at its upper floors that are categorically different from what most buildings ever encounter. A 10-inch deep crack in that core is not a facade defect. It is a structural event. In a building where the core wall is 30 inches thick, a 10-inch crack penetrates 1/3 of the wall's design thickness. Structural engineers have raised concerns about safety, with some warning that unless extensive renovations are made, the building could become uninhabitable. CBS News. The damage has corroded some of the steel in the tower's reinforced concrete columns. CNN. Corroded steel in a building that is currently occupied, in a building whose most recent facade inspection was conducted in April 2025, in a building where a unit went into contract for $92 million in August 2023, 4 years after the first lawsuit detailing substantial cracking was filed. Here is what is not making headlines. Harry Macklowe does not own any units in 432 Park Avenue anymore. Macklowe was ultimately forced to give up his condominiums in the building to CIM. Wildfire Explorer forced to give up, not chose to sell, not decided to exit the investment, forced, as a consequence of the legal and financial dispute between Macklowe and CIM Group, the co-developers, to surrender ownership of the units he held in the building, the developer who chose aesthetic over engineering, who suggested yacht sealant for a cracking concrete tower, who fired the consultants who warned of the problems, who made $900 million from the project. He no longer owns a single square foot of what he built. Macklowe requested that CIM's lawsuit against him not go to trial, but a judge denied his request in November 2024. Wildfire Explorer. A judge denied his request. The trial will happen. The 7 million pages of documents will enter the record. The 100 days of depositions will produce testimony. The allegation that a letter to the New York City Department of Buildings misrepresented 1,893 defects will be examined by a court. And meanwhile, there were 18 apartments on sale by May 2024, including one that the sponsors had never managed to sell. Wildfire Explorer 18 units for sale in a building where a buyer in August 2023 paid $92 million for a floor. In a building the lawsuit describes as experiencing thousands of severe cracks, a 10-inch core fracture, corroding rebar, and water infiltration. People are still buying apartments at 432, Georgia Forestry Commission. Still buying. The Teflon building, described by a real estate broker in exactly those terms, where the most alarming disclosures in the history of New York residential real estate have not, as of this writing, stopped transactions. Here's the financial arithmetic that the lawsuit has produced. The developers made $900 million from 430 Dow Park Avenue. The projected total sellout was $3, $1 billion. Construction cost was approximately $1, $25 billion. The profit was extracted from the project and distributed to CIM Group and Macklowe in the years following the building's 2015 opening. A 3-year, $160 million renovation plan has been discussed among residents and board members. The proposal would repair existing damage and help prevent future structural compromise. CBS News, $160 million, 3 years, to fix what the lawsuit alleges was known to be defective before the building opened. The $160 million repair bill does not fall on CIM Group. It does not fall on Harry Macklowe, who no longer owns units. It falls on the condo board, which means it falls on the owners of the units. The people who paid $10 million, $20 million, $30 million, $70 million, $92 million for their residences in the world's most glamorous super tall tower. The spokesperson for 432 Park said the board has spent less than $300,000 on facade repairs in 5 years, while also spending more than $20 million on legal fees and consultants. CNBC, $20 million on legal fees. From the condo owners who are already paying for units in a building with a $165 million lawsuit, a $160 million repair estimate, and ongoing facade degradation. The residents of 432 Park Avenue are simultaneously paying for their units, paying for the lawyers suing the developers, and now being asked to fund a 3-year renovation that addresses a defect the developers allegedly knew about before the building was built. CIM Group has denied the need for such repairs and stated that reports of structural failure are baseless and defamatory. CBS News baseless and defamatory from the entity that made $900 million against the residents who are living in the building. So ask yourself 3 questions. The 432 Park Avenue lawsuit alleges that McGraw-Hudson and WSP sent a letter to the New York City Department of Buildings that misrepresented the nature, extent, and type of cracking, and failed to disclose the full findings of a survey that had discovered 1,193 defects. The DOB issued a Swarm P classification based on the inspection reports it received. The developers cited the Swarm P classification as evidence that the building is safe. If the allegation in the lawsuit is proven that a letter to a city agency misrepresented 1,893 documented defects, what is the specific legal consequence for the engineers and contractors who signed the letter? What is the regulatory consequence for the Department of Buildings inspection process that relied on it? And what does it mean for every building in New York City that has a DOB facade classification? If the classification can be obtained through a letter that does not fully disclose the underlying survey findings? CNN. The developers fired every consultant that warned of the problems. An elastomeric covering, the engineering solution recommended by consultants, was rejected because it would significantly alter the building's appearance and make it less appealing to the world's billionaires. The developers made $900 million from the project. Macklowe suggested using a clear silicone finish similar to the one used to protect his yacht. The developers are now defendants in a $165 million fraud lawsuit built on 7 million pages of documents. At what point in the development process? When mock-up tests showed the concrete would crack, when the first consultants warned of the problems, when the elastomeric solution was rejected for aesthetic reasons, when the consultants were fired? Did the behavior of the developers cross from aggressive real estate development into the deliberate and far-reaching fraud that the lawsuit alleges? And is that line currently enforceable under New York real estate law? Or does the $900 million already distributed to the developers exist in a jurisdiction where the condo board's only remedy is a civil lawsuit in Manhattan State Supreme Court? Georgia Forestry Commission. And if people are still buying apartments at 432 Park Avenue, if transactions are still occurring in a building with a 10-inch crack in its structural core, thousands of facade defects, corroding rebar, ongoing water infiltration, a $165 million fraud lawsuit, a $160 million repair estimate, and a DOB classification that the lawsuit alleges was obtained through a letter that misrepresented 1,893 defects. What information does a buyer in New York City currently receive before closing about the documented structural and legal history of a specific building? And who is responsible for ensuring that the 7 million pages of documents in Manhattan State Supreme Court are accessible to a buyer whose broker is describing 432 Park Avenue as a treasure? Right now, as you read this, 432 Park Avenue is standing at the corner of 56th Street and Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, 1,396 feet tall, 96 stories, the 6th tallest building in the United States. The most recent facade inspection, filed on April 15, 2025, showed that 432 Park Avenue's exterior walls are swamp, safe with a repair and maintenance program. The wall or parts of the wall were safe at the time of the inspection, but need repairs or maintenance within the next 5 years to keep them from becoming unsafe. CNBC safe, for now, with a program. Within 5 years, the lawsuit is built on 7 million pages of documents and 100 days of depositions. The board is seeking $165 million in damages, along with punitive damages and compensation for losses tied to declining property values caused by flooding and erosion from the cracks. CNN's 7 million pages. Inside which is a letter that allegedly misrepresented 1,893 defects to the city of New York. Inside which are the records of every fired consultant. Inside which is the email trail from the meeting where the elastomeric covering was rejected because it would make the building less appealing to the world's billionaires. CIM made a cool $900 million in profit. Georgia Forestry Commission, $900 million extracted, distributed, gone. Into the accounts of entities that now deny the building has a structural problem that their own internal documents allegedly knew about from the moment the mock-up tests confirmed the concrete would crack. On the sidewalk of Park Avenue, pedestrians walk beneath a tower whose facade an independent structural engineer said no sidewalk shade can protect them from if concrete falls from 1,396 feet. In Manhattan State Supreme Court, a judge in November 2024 denied Harry Macklowe's request that the case not go to trial. The trial will happen. The 7 million pages will be entered into the record. And somewhere in those pages, in the deposition transcripts, in the email chains, in the engineering reports that recommended the fix that was rejected because it would change the color, is the specific moment when $900 million became more important than the concrete. The building is still swampy. The lawsuit is still proceeding. The crack in the core is still 10 inches deep. And the people who made the $900 million are no longer inside it.